Good afternoon, everyone. My name is DM Rawlings, the 10-Minute DM. I am an experienced Forge in the Dark GM, and I am here to offer some advice to you 10 minutes at a time. So today, we're going to talk about how gear works in Candela Obscura. And I thought I'd mention that Candela Obscura has the best write-up that I've seen for gear in a Forge in the Dark game yet. The Blades in the Dark book does it, but it's kind of split over a few different areas, and it's not really ideal for new people coming into it. Because getting the hang of gear is something that, if you're coming from games like D&D, may take some work in these Forge in the Dark games. So let's get into it. You might have noticed that there aren't any gear tables in Candela Obscura. There isn't a longsword that does d8 slashing damage. There's no tool proficiencies. There aren't even skills. But yet, despite missing all of these details, the game runs just fine. So how does gear work then? In Candela Obscura, we use in-the-moment, fiction-driven, contextual table rulings for our gear. This is one of the key ways that fiction-first games like Blades in the Dark differ from other traditional games. When I say in the moment, we decide how gear is going to help as it's being used, not before. It's fiction-driven. We decide that gear will help based on its relevance to the story and the tone. So an example of this is Grandpa's shotgun may actually be mechanically better than a random shotgun at some point based on how important it is to the story at the time. And then lastly, contextual. We decide how gear is going to work given the current situations, not in a vacuum. So you follow the rules, and gear has 4 possible things that it can do. Having the right gear can let you make a roll when normally you would not be able to. It will let you not make a roll when you normally would be required to. It can improve the expectations of the roll, which are the best possible outcome that roll may have, or they might reduce the stakes, making something less risky than they were before. So let's hop into a couple of examples of this. So let's say we're fixing an automobile, and depending on the nature of how much damage has been caused to it, you may need nothing at all. You might just need to hit it with your fist or something like that. You might need a toolkit to get access to tools that are going to be needed for the fix, or you might need a full garage. A GM can say that unless you mark some gear for a toolkit or something like that, then you can't even make that roll because you don't have a necessary thing that's required in order to complete the roll. You can't punch your way through a bank vault, right? That's just not going to happen. But if you had explosives, the right tool, then maybe you can give that a go. This is where gear giving permissions to make a roll makes sense. Secondly, you might have a security line that you need to get past. And if you're able to flash some press credentials, maybe a GM says that because you have the right gear at the right time, you don't even need to make a roll at all. The person in security expects press to be able to go through, so why would that even turn into a contest? Right? Alternatively, you might be able to jerry-rig a fix for something, but if you had the right replacement parts, maybe you don't need to roll. If you have the right gear at the right time, making a roll just seems unnecessary. So that is another mechanical thing that gear can do. Next up, if you bring a hunting rifle, the expectations for a long-range shot might improve. A GM might say that if you succeed, you'll knock the target down. Right? You're just improving what is possible with a successful roll. Whereas maybe with a revolver, if you get a partial success, it might only graze them, which is a concession according to consequences in the Candela Obscura book. The default expectation is somewhere in the middle, but then depending on the caliber of gear that you have to solve that specific problem, you can slide the expectations up for more, or you can downgrade them based on the gear that's there. And then lastly, if you have a bleed containment vial when you're handling bleed, that's going to lower your stakes. A GM might say that the roll is normal stakes rather than high because you have the right tool to do so in a safe way. And again here, just like above, the default stakes are normal, but you're moving that up and down based on the gear that you have. So how do we make these calls? I hope those examples are a really good starting point that get your brain thinking about how you're going to interpret these. So I think the important first steps are to take a moment to review the context that the gear is being used in. Imagine yourself in the scene and ask what makes sense in the moment. But I do have some notes, and one is, keep the relative advantage in mind. Someone with a knife is going to have a leg up on someone that's just using their fists. Someone with a gun is going to be better than a knife. If there's supernatural monster claws, maybe that's better than guns at close range. Or maybe explosive charges are better at close range than monster claws. Good specific solutions should usually be better than general ones. Next up, be consistent to the tone and the feel of the game rather than to precedent. In any kind of game, you're never going to be doing the same thing twice without there being some change to the situation. So just because something worked before one way, it doesn't mean that it's going to work the exact same way next time. For example, a bleed containment vial might be fine for reducing the stakes of a challenge, but other times there might just be so much bleed that it doesn't even matter. Your ruling should always reflect what's happening currently in the moment, rather than relying overmuch on precedent. The conversation is an essential tool. It's on page 2 of the book. In Forge of the Dark games, the conversation is that exchange that a GM is going to have with a player before they make their roll. It's where you're going to clarify how the character is approaching the role, asking clarifying questions and whatnot. It's going to determine what action is generally used. Usually I let players tell me what action they want, and then we're going to set the expectations and the stakes. If the player isn't aligned with what you've said during that part of the conversation, then there are some things that you can do, like find out why they feel they'd be more successful or less at risk than they currently are. Maybe you can suggest some kind of gear that they can use to improve this. Or maybe, in the end, they can decide that they want to try a different approach. By its nature, the conversation should be a relatively quick exchange, but there should be some back and forth until everyone's on the same page, knows what the risks are, and then makes the roll. And then lastly, I'll say, reward player cleverness and character-appropriate responses. I tend to overly tune narratively cool offers from players, especially when a player is willing to put their character at risk with obviously interesting consequences. Our objective is to yes and all reasonable explanations, but check it. Would the character know how to use this gear? If not, bring that into the conversation. It's okay to ask, where did your character learn how to fix an engine? This is a great opportunity to develop character backgrounds and show off the skill of your characters. So, I hope that has been helpful. If you found it helpful, please hit that subscribe button. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these videos now that the book is out. I've been DM Rawlings, the 10-Minute DM, and I'll catch you next time.